Hey, good day everybody. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Angelo Mekenkamp and I work at PwC for over 4 years now in the Netherlands. So today I'm going to talk about how we can push the boundaries of IdentityNow. But before we do this, I'm going to start with something about myself, which is that I really like to do puzzles. Puzzles is a thing that helps me to find solutions in a way that helps me to get creativity going on. I find something, I can solve it, sometimes I can't, and just knowing the solution, it gives a really nice way to get to the point here. So here I have two puzzles for you that you might are already taking a look at, that I think might be a nice way to start this session. So on the left side, we have a couple of gears, and the question is here, what is wrong? So some of you might already see or have the knowledge that if one gear rotates, let's say clockwise, that the gear next to it will rotate counterclockwise, the next to that one clockwise again. And if you use that, you will deduce here that if you have a cycle of odd length, so in this case 7, at some point it will break and a gear will be both clockwise and going counterclockwise, which is not possible. So that's the thing here. So what we do here is we use knowledge to get to the solution here. With the other one, it might be a bit more tricky. How can we take a look at this? Maybe you have some experience with mathematics, you know some knowledge about prime numbers or arithmetics, but that doesn't really help here. So for some puzzles, it can be that you really need to use creativity. You need to maybe take a look at it from a different angle, have a different perspective, and once you take a look at it from a different angle, then it could be that it is suddenly very easy to get that solution, which is in this case what we have here. So this concept of using knowledge or sometimes getting creative is what we are going to do to solve the next puzzle. And the next puzzle is going to be the biggest of them, which is going to be the concept of dormant accounts. So here we have some, let's see, let me just get rid of this one. There we go. So here we have a problem that is dormant accounts. Whenever we have a zero trust security model that we want to put into place, we do need to take a look at dormant accounts. They violate the principle of least privilege and are therefore excessively expanding our attack surface. Whenever there's an account that you are using, everything is fine, but if you have an active account that you are not using, why is it then still active? That's then the question here. And also it might cause unwanted license costs. So that's something that we want to tackle, and we want to tackle that within Identity Security Cloud. Yeah, okay. Cutting some technical problems here.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, thank you. So let me go to the next slide then. Oh, okay, yes. So we have 3 components in our solution here. First, we need to be able to detect the dormant accounts. Then we need to disable or delete the accounts depending on the criticality level or the needs for this particular application. And finally, we need to block the recreation of the account. For detecting, that's the first part that we're going to take a look at. There are 3 different concepts that we need to take a look at. First, we want to see what is a dormant account, what is the exact definition, otherwise we can't continue with it. Further, we want to assess the different detection methods in order to see how we can detect the dormant accounts. And finally, we're going to implement this detection mechanism. So for the to determine the scope of accounts, we are saying here that a dormant account is an enabled account where the last login date is more than X days ago. And X might depend on your policy, which can also depend on different applications and their criticality levels. So what I have here is, for this demo, I have 3 different sources that are called Fin4U, SAP Concur, and Expense. And these 3 sources have different account attributes that allow us to see when the user has last logged in on that application, which is a value that we get when we do account aggregation. Also, we can't control from these specific applications what the date format is on that application. It could differ. So therefore, we also have in this table different date formats that we're going to use. We also saw that the number for X, the amount of days before we consider it unused, is visible here. And finally, we have the action that we say, when it's detected as a dormant account, do we need to disable it or do we need to delete it? So if the action is delete, it could also be that we want to consider disabled accounts. So that's something that we want to take into account as well. So let's start with assessing the detection methods. We can take a look at search, workflows, external script, and transforms. So for search, those are the most viable solutions. For search in the UI, you can take a look that's a neat way to find the identities, the roles, the access profiles, entitlements, etc. But you can't get the index accounts. And you can ask for give me all identities that have a disabled account or an active account in a particular source, but you can't get the other account attributes such as a last login date. So that doesn't really help us for detection. For workflows, there are more ways how we can use it. However, there are some limitations on workflows. For example, if we do the action get accounts, it returns a maximum of 250 results. So we need to do something complex as paginating through it, which using workflows is quite difficult to get. Also keeping in account that there's no filtering on last login supported in the action get accounts. We can also loop through things in workflows, but it doesn't support items when the array is bigger than 100. So that also doesn't really work for us. And then we have the option of external scripts. And external scripts, we can use it for practically anything. What we can do is paginate over v3/accounts, but there are some drawbacks to external scripts. One of all is that it would require massive data communication. We would need to fetch it all. We can't filter on it in this API. And then once we get all the data, then our script can filter through it. But maybe smaller customers would say, well, we have chosen for IdentityNow as a SaaS product such that we don't have to keep our own platform where we need to take a look at how to secure our data from that point of view, or we don't want to write these scripts here. We really want to have it in IdentityNow for that reason. And the bigger clients might say, well, we want to be efficient and have quick results here with our massive number of accounts. So we prefer it to be an identity security cloud as well. So what we end up with is the option of transforms. And transforms, they offer a lot of different capabilities. We can get account attributes from it. We can compare it. It supports date math, compare, periodic refreshes. And it also supports having complex nested transforms without a hard limit. And also it's very nice to work with. It's built into Identity Security Cloud itself and is quite optimized. So that's the one that we're going to use. And without further ado, let's demo and create this. So I'm going to go to my SailPoint page here. And what we want to do actually is to create an identity attribute, what we need such that we can put that transform on that. So if I would go to the v3 documentation, then I can see that there is, let's see, no, this is a beta API to create an identity attribute. Let's see, create identity attribute. And here we can pass some information like name, display name, and one of the things is multi, which can be here, the default is false, but it can indicate whether the identity attribute is multi-valued. And that's something that we would like to have, because one person can have multiple dormant accounts that we want to detect and put in this identity attribute. So what we're going to do is go to Postman, where we have the beta identity attributes visible here, and I already have populated some of these values, but here the display name, a nice name that we can use is, let's say, dormant accounts. And then as a technical name here, we are going to use dormant accounts. The type is a string. Let's use that right now for the data that we want to give. And here, as multi-valued, we're going to try true. And there's also a value called sources, which has a rule in here. This is something that you need for an identity attribute to really be populated and visible in the way that you would expect it. You can also create this identity attribute through the UI, and then you don't have to worry about this part. But if you do it through the API, I suggest to add this one as well. So I'm happy with this, so I'm going to create it. It's created, and I can see that we have the sources, we have the name, display name. However, we do see here that multi is false, so we can see, okay, we do have to go with a single value, and we need to find a way using that down the line. So now that we have this identity attribute, we can create our transform. So I'm going to Visual Studio Code here, and let me go to transforms, and I will create one. So here, as a transform name, I would suggest to just use the identity attribute dormant accounts. Now go hit enter. Here I use the extension on VS Code for Identity Security Cloud. So I'll call it dormant accounts. And here, because it's a multi-valued, I want it to be multi-valued. And if you have multiple dormant accounts, in order to get that visible, I'm going to use a concatenation and simply have comma-separated values as a workaround. So here I will say concatenation. And here I have my first transform. I have a snippet that I can now fill in. And how I'm going to start is first assume that I already have a transform that can do all the amazing stuff that we want to detect this dormant accounts. And what we then want to do is call the transform for each source that we want to use this functionality of detecting this for. So what I'm going to do here is create a reference transform like this. And as ID, let me now assume that it's called dormant accounts default. And this magic transform, of course, needs to have information, like what is the number of X before we consider the dormant account unused? Which source should I take into account? What is the account attribute name? So all these kinds of things we need to pass on to this transform, and we can do that using the input variable. And here, this input also needs to be a string, what transforms is working with. So in order to pass all this information, I again am going to use a comma-separated value. So first, I want to pass the source ID to tell the system which one to go with. And well, I had 3 sources to start with, one of which was fin4u. And for demo purposes, all of these sources I have in Airtable. I have the data visible, so I can manage it through that for this demo. So I'll click on the fin4u source, and then you can take the source ID from the URL. And then I will simply copy it in here. And this is one of the parameters that I need to give. And now it needs to know what is the account attributes. So here, if I go to the fin4u account schema, then we can see that we have here something called last login with capital L twice. And then we can simply copy it here as well, and saying this is the account attribute that has this information. Right now, it wouldn't know which of these is the value that we're going to use, and by writing it here, I'm giving this information. Then we need to know in which date format is this, and for this application, it is first it shows you the days, then it will show you the month, and then we have the year visible. So we can pass it on like this. And the amount of days that needs to be expired, needs to have passed before we consider the account an unused account is 100 in this case. And there's just one last parameter that we need to give, and that's whether or not it should take into account the accounts that are already disabled. And since for this source, whenever it becomes a dormant account, we want to disable it. Once it's disabled, we don't care about it anymore. So I'm going to say true, where I'm telling the system, ignore all the disabled accounts for now. And one last thing that we can do here is to add a description. And this is just for us to see which one this is being used for, which can be quite handy if you are later on taking a look at this transform and you see the source ID, but you don't really know which source it belongs to. So now we have one value, and since it's a concatenation and we also want to support it on the other sources, I'm going to now add these same two transforms again. But for that I already have populated the transforms. I'm going to simply copy it and add it here, like this. So besides Fin4U, we also have our SAP Concur, our expense, and we have their own source ID, different attributes, different trends, different date formats, etc. So now I'm happy and I can save this transform. Let's see, unable to write down, unable to create because the name is already being used. Okay. So what we see here that I've already created this one. So let me just go to transforms and delete them, and this one as well. Okay. And I'm once again going to create it, so I will call it again dormant accounts. And it's a concat. And I'm going to replace it with what I just had and save it. Perfect. We can see that it has been created because now this transform has its own ID. So what we can now do is take a look at this transform. We are referring to it, but we haven't created it. So that's the next step that we are going to do. So I'm going to go to transforms, say create another one, give the name, hit enter. And here, what transform type I'm going to do is a static one. Because a static transform allows us to use the Apache velocity logic, and that's what I want to do here. So let's see where we are. Yeah, so we have our value, and in our value we want to specify the account that is a dormant account. So how this is going to look like is that we have a $sign for a variable, and then I'm going to say account underscore ID. Let's say that we are interested in the ID for now. And also what can be useful is to also know which source this account is for. So I'm going to say source ID, account ID, followed by a comma. And in this way, if you are going to concatenate all this, it's easy to see which is the source ID, which is the one before the colon, and which account ID belongs to it, which is the one after. So this is ultimately what it's going to look like, but we do need to populate these values first, source ID and account ID. And let me start with this with the source ID, which I'm going to add here. And here I can define this variable source ID. And this one, actually I'll already get from the parent transform that's calling this one. And it's going to be the first value in the input separated by commas. So in order to get that, I'm going to create a transform that is a split transform, where the delimiter is a comma and the index is going to be 0 since it's the first one. And the input can be removed because I'm getting the input specifically from the parent transform. So here I have my source ID, which is looking well. And what I now want to define is this one, the account ID, which can be a little bit trickier. So let's see what we can do here. I'm going to create this variable account ID, and in order to populate it, I'm going to need a, let's see, another static transform. tr static, and that gives me my code snippet. And here this value is going to need the account that you have on that specific source. So what I would expect it to be is something like $identity, such that I can get the identity. And from that, I want to say get accounts by source ID, like this. Unfortunately, this method does not exist on this identity. However, by looking at the documentation in the Java docs, you can see that instead of accounts, you can type down links, which is the way how SailPoint calls accounts deeper into the code. And instead of source, it's going to become app. So we have get links by app ID or name, which is also what we need. And this method is actually existing. So this one requires two sets of inputs. The name, which we will leave out, null, because all we need is the source ID. So here I'm going to use the variable source ID again. Unfortunately, this value that we have here, the source ID value, is not able to detect this one. So what we need to do is define it in here as well. So here I have it like this as well. And I can remove that comma. So now we should have that account. Let's see, this gives us the list of accounts. And for demo purposes, I'm going to assume that every identity has at most one account. You can do, you can extend it to ensure that you can also tackle it whenever an identity has multiple accounts on the same source, but that's going to make this transform even complexer. So we'll keep it at this for now. And so what we actually want to do is get the first value of this list, if it exists, and then we are going to take the ID of that, and then we have the account ID. However, we have to keep in mind, what about if we have identities that don't have any account on this particular source? Then we get an error as soon as we are going to get the zero, the index. So I'm going to add a condition here using Apache Velocity again. So I'm giving an if statement, and at the end it's going to end. And what we need here is to see if this value is actually existing. So we can copy this to get all the accounts. And based on this, we can ask for the length. And unless the length is 0, we want to display this. Let's see. Instead of length, I think it should be size. So let's change it to this. And now we have the account ID. Yeah, whenever you have at least one account, I'm going to give the first one, because I'm assuming that you don't have any more right now. So we have our values for source ID and account ID. However, we want to also add some conditions. We don't want to directly give you these values. It should only return these if you are a dormant account. And for that, we need some conditions. So let's first add a if-else statement here. So I'm going to say if, and then between brackets, and at the end, I'm going to end it. And what we are going to ask here is that, first of all, you need to have an account. So our account ID needs to be populated. And furthermore, we need two more checks, one of which is the question if it is an unused account or not. So if the last login date is more than so many days ago. So for that, we are going to have the variable is unused account. And that one should then equal to true. A lot of transforms return strings, so I'm going to compare it to the string true. Let's see, and besides checking if it's an unused account or not, we also have to take into account whether or not the account is disabled or not. In some cases, we don't want to show it then. So that's the condition that we're going to put in here, where we either are going to say that it is not a disabled account. So that's what we have here. We use the variable is disabled account, and it should not equal to true. Okay. However, in the cases that we want to delete the account, it could be that we are interested in the disabled accounts. So if it is a disabled account, it could be that we still want to get it, and for that we add the or statement, which is saying that it could be that we are saying exclude disabled accounts, and if that is not equal to true, then in this case we are also interested in it. So that completes our condition here, but we have defined new variables, and for that we do need to populate them again. So I'm going to start with the easiest one, which is going to say is disabled account. Let me just copy this here. And well, the is disabled account is pretty similar to the account ID. So instead I'm going to copy this one and then overwrite that value. like this. And it's again going to check, do you have at least one account? And if you do, it is not interested in the ID, but it's interested in if it is disabled. And for that, we have the isDisabled method that we can call. Yeah, that looks fine. So that is one of the variables. Then we have the next one, which is going to be exclude disabled accounts. And this is one that we already have put here. We have twice true, and in the case of this one where we do want to delete it for expense, we are going to say false. So this is another time that we need to fetch that value. And therefore I'm going to copy the source ID part, which is quite similar, but instead of index 0, we are interested in index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the one that we are going to put in here. And of course, we need to update the variable name to exclude disabled accounts. Like this. And then we have the last one, which is the most crucial and important one for our transform, which is it an unused account, yes or no? So that's one that we are also going to define here. Let's put it just here. And for this one, we are going to create a, let's see, first valid transform. And the first valid transform is this one. And it allows us to say whenever there is an error in any of these values, we want to ignore it. So that's a value that we're going to add here. So we have our attributes, and at the end we're going to say, if there's an error in one of these values, go to the next one anyway and don't break the code. So, and the last value that we're going to do is conclude that there is no unused account in here, where we are going to start with a more interesting transform. Because this transform is going to be a date compare, where we're going to compare the date that is on the source that we have aggregated that says last login, and we need to compare it with now minus the amount of days that we consider that is the threshold. So here we're going to create a transform, and it's going to be then a date compare, like this. And we need to have 2 dates, and then we compare them using the greater than operation. And in the positive condition, we're going to say, yes, it is an unused account. And in the negative condition, we are going to say, no, it is not. So let's start then with populating the first date. If I haven't told you already, this is a quite complex transform that we have to fill in to get all of this working. So the first date is going to be a date math, where we want to subtract X amount of days from today. So this is going to be another snippet, date compare. Let's see, no, date math. Like this. And the expression would be something like now minus 100 days. However, this 100 is depending on the value that we get as input. And according to the documentation of SailPoint, every string can be replaced by another transform. So that's also what we are going to do now. So instead of this, I'm going to make it as a concatenation, where it has a couple of values. First of all, it has the value now minus. Then it needs that date, which is going to be another split transform, where in this case we are looking at the third index. And after we give the amount of days, we do need to end by saying that it is days that we are talking about. And these ones I am not interested in right now. So that is our first date that we need. And then the second date that we have here, for that we want to first get the account attribute and then do a date format to ensure that it is in the same date as the first one that we are getting. However, the date format has some tricky bits. So for that, I'm going to open one of the transforms that I have built already, which is dynamic date format. And with dynamic date format, you can see here that if we have a date format, let's take this one, then you can give the input in this way, but this string is not able to get replaced by another transform. So in this case, as a workaround, what I have here is I've expanded the date format transform by creating my own dynamic date format transform, which is a lookup, and it expects this value, and then it will also put it in here. And similar with this one. So for each date format that we want to support, we need to add one record here where we are specifying this. And then as input, it requires the specific date and the date format, and it's with comma separated, and it will do another trick of splitting it and getting that value. So actually, we do want to refer to this one. So that's what we are going to do here. For the second date, we are going to use the reference transform. And then as input, over as ID, I'm going to call the dynamic date format 1. And as input, we do need to give the account attribute, and we need to give the date format. And this is going to be separated by commas, so therefore this one needs to be another concatenation. And it's going to have two values, and let's here start with the first one, which is going to be the account attribute. Like this. And it does say here source name, but actually we don't want to give the source name because we don't have that. We do have the source ID. So what you want is to do it like this and just type down source ID. However, this doesn't work. You would need to use application ID to get this working, as you can see in the 0-point documentation. And this one is what we have gotten from the parent transform as well. So again, we can use the split transform, where we're going to get the first value in our list. And after we have passed this account attribute, like this, we need to pass in the date format. And the date format that we have is going to be, let's see, am I doing this right? We have here values, account attributes, application ID. It also needs the attribute name here, and that is the one that we have here, last logged in. And this is also what I can do, is create another transform, which is also a split. And this time we are interested in the index number 1. So now with this account attribute, I'm saying from this particular source ID, give me this particular account attribute. So that's one that we have here. We have found the account attribute, and then our dynamic date format needs to have this account attribute, but it also needs to have that date format, which is then another split transform where we are going to take a look at index number 1. Okay. And in between, I want to add a comma, such that it's really clear this is the date and this is going to be the date format. In case the date format also has a comma, then I would suggest to use a different delimiter than a comma, such maybe as a pipe or something that doesn't get in the way of the things that we want to do here. So let's see, here it's going to complain about this one, so let me just create it again. Transform split, where I'm interested in the date format, which is number 2. Okay, we might have to debug this a little bit later. But so far, I'm quite happy what we have right now. We have our account attributes that we are transforming based on this, and then we have our second date, which should look. So let's see if I can figure out what's going on here. We have our dynamic date format, our concatenation, and the values of type account attributes. I'm not seeing what's going on here right now. So what I'm going to do is take the transform that I already have, built before this, and just override it with this, just to ensure that I have got the right fields. Yeah. it looks like the same now. And one thing that I've also added in here is the requires periodic refresh to be true, because in case that we want to, this transform should refresh every day to calculate if the time has passed far enough such that it becomes a unused account. So I'm happy with this one. I do need to get rid of this one, dormant accounts default, and I can save this transform. There we go. And we now have created it. So in summary, again, we have our identity attribute dormant accounts. It should refer to this transform that we're going to do in a bit. And we then have 3 times calling this inner transform that's going to do all this magic. It's taking the values that we have here to determine if it is an unused account and gives it in the right moment. So this allows us to go back to the UI, and I'm going to identity profiles, to employees. And I want to edit, populate this identity attribute through the mapping. So we go here to dormant accounts. As we see here, I'm going to write down employees, which is the authoritative source in this case. And the attribute we don't really want to give because there's no additional input that we need to give. However, it's a mandatory field if you want to use a transform. So for now, I suggest to use the same value that you use for the UID, because that one is always filled in. And then it will simply ignore this field. And then we want to use the transform dormant accounts, which was the parent transform. So let's save it. And now it might be a good time to go to the Airtable connector where I mentioned that I have my sources set up. So here I have my Fin4U accounts, where I have 3 accounts ready for John, Jane, and Cody, where we can see that John has a disabled account, the other 2 are active, where the last login is 2022, 2023, and this one was just 2 days ago. So so Cody's account is an active account that is still being used. Jane's account is an active account that is not being used anymore, and John's account is a disabled account that is also not being used anymore. So then let's see if we do an apply changes to the identity profile, then we want these values to be populated. Then what I can do is go to the identity that is Cody. And let's see. It does have a dormant account, but this is from a different source. But we do see that the value is getting populated right now. We do have a source and we have an account ID. And one reason why I have this source ID in here is because if we go to search, then we want to wonder ourselves which identities have at least one dormant account. So we can go here to say attributes.dormant accounts. Then we can remove that last colon, go to the start and say exists, colon, attributes.dormant accounts. And now we see Cody and Jane that have them. And in the column chooser, I can then add this attribute dormant accounts. And let me just also add a custom identity attribute such that I can do this and see all the values. So we see here that also the concatenation of multiple unused accounts or dormant accounts are working, and that right now Jane has 2 of them. So let's say that we want to focus only on Fin4U as an account. So then what we can do is go to sources, go to our source and grab that source ID from here. And then in the search, we are going to say, now give me everybody that has an attribute dormant accounts that contains this source ID. And now we see that we only have Jane, since Cody had an active account that was still being used, and John had a disabled account, which we didn't care about right now. So let's use this, and assume that we don't want to do the automatic part yet. Then we can go to our identity, that is Jane. I will go to accounts, Fin4U, and this one I'm going to say now disable. Disable the account. We can see here in the connector that it's getting disabled. There we go. And now if I go back to Jane as an identity, I go to the identity attribute. It still has 2, but I have to refresh the page. And we can see that it is gone, because now it is a disabled account and it doesn't care about this anymore. So even if you don't already automatically process automatic disabling and things like that, we already have a nice way now to do analysis on this and disable them ourselves if we want. But we want to take this a step further, so go back to the slides. And we see that we have finished the detection part, and we now want to take a look at disabling or deleting. And for that, we can, again, take a look at the handling methods. We have search, workflows, external scripts, and lifecycle states. And search really does a read-only thing. It doesn't, you can use it to send emails, but we can't use it for automatic disabling. Workflows is might be a good way, so let's get at that later. External scripts, that's always still a viable option, although there's no API available in Identity Security Cloud to delete an account from a direct source. And again, you would need to require these additional resources. And then we have lifecycle states. Based on the lifecycle state change, you can choose to disable an account, but you can't delete an account with that. So we are going to take a look at workflows. We can trigger it on the identity attribute change. So whenever we detect the dormant account, it immediately can start the workflow. It does support disable accounts, and for delete, we have to take a look a little bit later. So that's what we are going to demo now. And I'm not going to build this myself. I've already built this, and I'm going to show how it is looking like, because it's easy to make mistakes when you are creating a workflow in here. So it consists of 4 workflows, one of which is the detect dormant accounts. So let's take a look at it. And it's a very small workflow, because as soon as it detects the identity attributes, where I use the advanced one, where I'm going to say whenever the changes to the dormant accounts and the new value is not empty, then I want to trigger this workflow. And the only thing that it's going to do is to call another workflow. So that's the one that I have here, request URL. I have to go to the end, beta workflows execute. And this allows us to have a different trigger, namely an external trigger. And what's going to pass on as information is the dormant accounts information, but also the previous dormant account information. That's all there is to this workflow, which I'm going to discard. And I'm going to disable these, because if they are enabled, it's not possible to view the configuration. So I'm disabling all of them, and then I take a look at the workflow that this one is being called, which is loop over dormant accounts. So here we have the external trigger, and we have the current dormant accounts, and we have the value that it was before. And we need to iterate over these dormant accounts. For each of them, we are going to do this. So we have defined a variable that's called first account, where we are simply taking the ID from that. And we know how long an ID is, so we can use the substring transform to do this in here. So I'm going to say start at length 33, which has then already the source ID and that comma in place, and then we say it's going to be of length 32. When I created this, this was the only option. Now you can also do a split type of thing in workflows, which can be the better alternative. And besides first account, I also have the first record, which is the combination of source ID and account ID. So here I have length 66. And then I'm going to compare this and take a look if the dormant accounts value is equal to the first record. That means that I have only one dormant account. If that is the case, I can just continue. But if that is not the case, I'm going to define a variable that are the other accounts, and then recursively in this HTTP request call it itself. So this one is going to actually call the same trigger as well, and that's why the first workflow immediately had to call this one, because a workflow that has that is not of an external trigger can't be called in such a way. So after the recursion, we can really focus on the first dormant account, which has our source ID and account ID. And then we want to compare it to see if it already existed in the previous dormant accounts. Maybe if we detect multiple dormant accounts quite quickly, we don't want to repeat doing it what we already did a minute ago or if it fails to disable the account, for example, we don't want to keep doing that and take a look at it later. So now I'm saying only the new ones that I noticed, those are the ones that I want to do something with it. So if it already exists, I'm going to end it, and otherwise I'm going to get the account data. Specifically, I'm interested in the native identity, and with that I'm going to call another workflow that is called handle accounts. So let's discard this one and go to that one, handle dormant accounts. And with this one, as input, we don't get the account ID, but the account native identity. And the reason I've chosen for that is that also if we have applications that don't have this account attribute last login, we are not able to detect it, but maybe a different system, different application that the client has can be used in here. So then we allow this external trigger as an external hook such that it can be called from there. And that other system might not know the account ID that we have in Identity Security Cloud, but they might have the native account ID of that account. So in here we have a couple of more requests to get the account and the source values. And I'm going to take a look at the source because the source JSON has the data that's going to say disable the account or delete the account. So here, if I go to transforms and I go to fin4u, for example, and I'm opening the source, then I can see that in the connector attributes, I have a dormant account operation defined that I'm going to say disable. So this here is where you make the distinction between what to do when you find a dormant account. So therefore, our workflow is getting that that source JSON that we have here, and it's going to compare it using this connector attributes dormant account operation. And if it's going to be disable, then we're going to call disable accounts with the ID that we have gotten from the action that we have taken to fetch the account again, such that we still have the account ID in here. And in that case, it is disabled. And if it is not disable, we are going to compare it again and take a look, maybe it is delete. If so, we are going to call the workflow that should delete it. I will go back to that later. And if both of them are not there, I'm going to simply end it. Maybe we have an application where we do want to detect it, but we don't want to automatically disable or delete the account yet. So that's what we have here, and that's what I now want to show. So I'm going to go back to the workflows. Let's discard any changes I have made. And I'm going to enable the detection, which is going to loop over it through the loop over dormant account workflow. And that when it's needed, is going to handle the dormant accounts, which might disable it. And that's something that we now want to show here. So let's go to the fin4u one here for Cody. We can see that Cody is right now has an active account that hasn't been logged on. Of course, what we can do now is wait for a month, and then it will become an unused account, but we are not going to wait for that so long. So here I'm going to simply change the date such that it is an unused account. So this is in fin4u, and let's see what happens now if, for Cody, we are aggregating this data. So I'm going to accounts, and then to fin4u. And we see that right now, the last login date here is in days, months, years format, and which is also what we had here. And we can see with the Conquer application, we have different format where we really use the names of the months, and here we also have a different where we start with the years. But with fin4u, we have the year at the end. And what I can do then is go to this one, and I will aggregate the account. Let's see here. Now you can see that it says 2024. Then we wait a bit. We can see the status is pending. Yes. And now it is 23. And it still has status enabled. But we can see that the workflow will be called. And let's see, oh, already I see that fin4u is now disabled. If I go back here, yes, we can see that the system has detected that it was an unused account, determined that we needed to disable the account, and then it simply disabled the account. So from now on, it will automatically do things like this. And we can also see in the details that this is still the value of SAP. So it got added as an unused account, it disabled it, and from that moment it was not interested anymore, and now it has been removed from this value. The only one that we still have here is the one that corresponds to the Concur account, where we have also 2023, which is in an active state. And the reason that it didn't disable this one yet is because it already knew that it was an unused account, and we didn't want to take those into account yet. So the first time you are going to want to start triggering this for a source, what you can best do is remove it from that transform list, parent one, ensure that you have done an identity refresh, then you can add it, and then you're basically telling IdentityNow again, saying, okay, please just re-trigger all the unused accounts that I want to disable, and it will do that. But from now on, any new unused dormant accounts, it will immediately disable those. Let's see. That brings us to the last part, which is the detection method. So we tried to implement the delete action, but we saw that in workflows, there is an action that says disable, and it also mentions that there's an action that says delete, but this is only working for delimited file sources and not for direct sources, and we really want to delete the account on the end system. So for this, we need to have some more information. We have to wonder ourselves, how can we store the blocked status? Because if we delete an account and the identity still has a role pointing to that application, then what IdentityNow would do after deletion of the account is simply recreating the account again. And that's something that we want to prevent. One might say, well, if the person is not using the account, should they then really have that role that points to that application? Or should that role really point to that application if the user still needs that role? And those are good questions, but that's something that the role modeling team then can take a look at in long term. But short term, we just want to disable the or delete the account to save license costs and to prevent security risks. Let's see, it's also possible that that role that user has also can point to other applications, and maybe the end user is still using those ones. So we just want to suppress the recreation in a certain way. And once we prevent that, we also want to facilitate unblocking. How can you get rid of this block? And for this block, we need to have a bit, a piece of information in IdentityNow that says this source, this identity shouldn't have an account on this source anymore. And we can't put that information in the account attribute because the account has been deleted already. And therefore, we have the questions here. How can we do this? So we start at a workflow, and we want to end up with account deleted. And for this, we can use a general before provisioning rule. Any way you want to delete an account through Identity Security Cloud of an application, it requires the before provisioning rule. And that could mean that you need to create a support ticket requesting the expert services team to deploy that before provisioning rule. That's something that we general don't want to do, but SailPoint has created a general before provisioning rule that you can simply ask if they can put it on your tenant, and that one helps us to add events in the JSON folder instead of in the rule, so we don't need to continuously update that one. So it's a one-time action. And once we start at the workflow, what we are going to do is assign a blocker role. What we want to do is ensure that before we delete it, we assign a role that is not added to any access profiles or entitlements. It's just there. But if you have it, we consider that the block of the recreation. And that's something that we have to implement. And next to that, if you have this blocker role, and at some point you're saying, okay, yeah, I didn't use that application and my account got deleted, but I really need to use it now. So I want Identity Security Cloud to provision it again, then you can simply do a revocation request, or the manager can do that to ensure that the blocker role is removed. And then recreation should be allowed again. And if you would then still have that original role, then it will be recreated. And that's something that I want to show with you now. So I'm going back to the UI. And I'm going to show that blocker role that I've created. Blocker. Let's see. There we go, block source expense. So this is the role that we have. And if I'm going to search for it, let's see, edit it, then I can see that there's no entitlements, no access profiles. It's just a simple thing, and it does allow access request. And our workflow needs to be able to request it. And if you don't want anybody else to request it, you can use segmentation for that, but I'll leave that out for now. And this blocker role has this ID, which ends with 813. And this is something that we need to inform the workflow, that whenever you want to delete the account that is called expense, this is the one that we have here, it needs to give this particular role. And for that, we copy this role ID, we go to our JSON again, of this time the expense source. And here we then have a connector attributes, which is called blocker role. So in the source JSON, we're going to say this is the role that matches to this application in case you want to block it. And here also, as we've seen with the other one, we have a dormant account operation. Let's find this one here, dormant account operation. And instead of disable, it's going to be delete here. And this role can then be taken from the workflow that wants to delete it. It grabs the source JSON, it grabs this role ID, and then it does a request role action. But that is not enough yet, because if you have that role, how can we then delete the account? Well, for that, we have the Cloud Services IDN setup that is part of that before provisioning rule. The before provisioning rule we have defined here with ID and that name, the services standard IdentityNow before provisioning rule, which you can ask of SailPoint to get on your tenant. And then that specific rule is listening to this setup. And we have an event configuration. And one of the things that we are going to do is that we say, in case we want to, let's go to this one. In case we want to disable the account, however, there's an account attribute called delete account that is equal to true. Then we are going to change the operation to delete. And this delete account is going to be part of the before provisioning rule. So before it's getting here to disable the account, it will go to the disable account provisioning policy. And here we have created a field called delete account, which should be true if it should be deleted and false if it should not be deleted. So here we have a transform, and this is going to be a reference where we call a transform that's called has role, and we give here, this is the role ID again, and we are asking this reference transform, does the identity have this role? If so, then we know that delete account is true, and otherwise we know that it is false. And that has role transform, I can show that here. That's using this one, identity.getAssigned role, where I'm giving the role ID. And this role ID is part of the input. So in order to retrieve that and get it as a variable, there's not an easy way to do that besides using a workaround. And as workaround, I'm going to define the role ID, and the transform is a lower transform, which says lowercase this value. And since the ID just consists of lowercase attributes anyway, it will not have an impact. But at least we now have that input as a value for our role ID variable. And then we can call it in here. This identity.getAssigned role. GetAssigned role is not in the Java docs yet, but I'll ask SailPoint to add it. We have seen that it has getAssigned roles. But even though it's not in the documentation, this is a working function that we can do. So we are basically saying here, if the identity getAssigned role, where we pass the role ID, is equals to true. No, let's see. If this role exists at all, and we are able to get it, then we say true, it has that role, and otherwise we're going to say false. And in case there are any errors trying to get this, then we know that it doesn't have that role. It could be that this is triggering an error if it doesn't have that role, and then we can simply just say false. So that's the has role transform. Let me just don't save it in case I have changed anything here. And so due to this transform, whenever we want to disable an account, it's going to check, do you have the block? And if so, it's going to be delete account is true. And we actually have the same for enable account. And then our expense source that we have here, it will then check if we are disabling the account and we indeed notice that we should delete it, then we change the operation to delete. And the same happens for enable. And what we can then do in our workflow, let's go to the last one. Delete source account. This is going to do a couple of checks, and one of which is manage access, and there it's going to request that particular role. So it's doing an access request here, and the role should be the source body connector attribute blocker role, which is the ID that we have put in the source JSON. And then once we have requested this, we need to wait. There's no way to say wait until that role is assigned. So I would suggest to wait at least 5 minutes. But in practice, I can see that waiting 1 minute is enough. So for the demo, I'm going to do that. And once I have that role and I've waited for that, then I want to take a look at the current state of the account. And if it is right now disabled, which I'm seeing here, I'm fetching the account, checking if it is disabled. And if that is the case, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to see if it is not disabled. So disabled equals to no. And if that is the case, then I am going to disable it. And if it is already disabled, then I'll go to this location, I'm going to enable it. And this is only to just create a trigger. I want it to be enabled if it was disabled, or disabled if it was enabled, such that it will reach the code that we have here and actually change it into a deletion. And that's all there is to this workflow. And one thing that we have is we need to prevent recreation. And for that, what we are going to do is take a look at the provisioning policy for account create. And here we need to add that blocker. So we have a couple of values on how we create our account. And what you can simply do is add a value called block creation. These values that you are giving here, they don't necessarily have to be an account attribute. And this is how I can use that fact to get this here. So as a transform, I'm going to have that reference again, where I'm checking if you have that role again, where I'm giving that ID again. And if you have it, block creation is going to be true. And then in the expense source, we see here that if we are wanting to create an account and we have the account attribute update triggers, which is the attribute block creation, which equals to true. And then instead of creating, what I'm going to do is take an event action where I'm going to say throw error. And I'm going to add this here where I'm saying creation failed due to blocking of creation. And that helps maybe admins or other people from the client to search on that error and take a look at, oh, it was blocked, but it's still trying to create it. So let's take a look at this user's role and if they really need that original role. So I think I've covered this enough. So let me just go to the demo here. And one thing that I need to do, of course, is to enable this workflow. So I'm going to say enabled, yes. And what we now have here is our expense accounts. And I see here that for Cody, the account is disabled and the last logon date is recent. So I'm going to change that and say, suppose that it was a long time ago. Then even though it is a disabled account, I still am interested in that. And that is what I have configured in here, where I said for expense, we should not exclude the disabled accounts. And then it should detect this. So let's just do this. I'm going to Cody. I'm going to the account expense. And here we can see last logon date is 2024. And I'm going to aggregate this account. We also get this if we do a full account aggregation, of course. But for simplicity, I'm just doing a single account aggregation right now. So we see the state was disabled. It already was that. The last logon date has changed. As a consequence, if I go to the identity attribute in here, it now has 2 values, and this second value belongs to that new source. So we have here the source ID for expense and the account ID. And because this identity attribute got changed, we have a workflow detect dormant accounts, which should now be running. It's 13:05 in here, and let's see, last time is 2050. So let's just open it again. To see if it is already running or not. Perfect, yes. We see that it triggered it on 13:05 and it's already complete. And what we expect it to have done is to call the loop over dormant accounts. And since we had two of those, one for SAP Concur and one for expense, we expect that this loop over was called once and then called itself again for the other one, which we should be able to see here. So I'm going to executions and I see 13:05, which is still running, and 13:06, which is done. And the 13:06, it quickly detected, oh, I already had this dormant account. It's not a new one, so I'm going to just ignore that. And for this one, it's now going to call the handle dormant account, which it may have done already. So I'm going to check this. Yes, we have here 13:06, so the handle dormant account was called, and we do expect it to call the deletion. So let's see if that is also happening. Executions. 13:06, and this one is running. And that makes sense because we added a wait 1 minute loop. But before that wait, we asked it to assign that blocker role. So let's see here. I'm going to the access of Kodi. I'm going to take a look at roles. I see that it has two roles, but it doesn't have that blocker role yet. Let me just refresh it. Maybe that will change it. Yes, 3 roles, and we can see that we now have that block source expense role. And one of them, the role that it already has here, HR Finance Reporter, if we click on it, we can see that one of the access is read-only entitlement on the expense source. But we also have our blocker now, and once that workflow is done, it's or done waiting, it should trigger enabling or disabling, and it should delete the account. So let's see, we see that it is still here, so it's still waiting for 1 minute. So I have here my Kodi account that is a read-only one, that has a read-only entitlement on it. And right now the last logon date is still 2023. So let's see, what can we do here? We have requested that role. We waited for 1 minute, and we can see now that the account has was deleted, and this was done by Identity Security Cloud. So one thing that we can do now is go to events. And then here we say create account failed. And why is this? It was deleted, it did a refresh, and it detected that it has this HR Finance Reporter role, and therefore it wants to create an account, but we have our blocker here, and therefore it is suppressing the create account. And if I click on the information, I see here creation failed due to blocking of creation. And therefore we simply don't see this value here. So let's say that the user now, that Kodi now actually wants to use this application. So it needs to get rid of that blocker role. And for that, what we can do is go to home. And my account is the account that is the manager of Kodi. So Kodi can ask me, can you get rid of that blocker? I still need it. Self-revocation is not supported right now, but the manager can. So the manager goes to my team, it sees Kodi, it sees the 3 roles it has and 4 accounts, and expense is not one of them because it has been deleted. It can go to the roles where there are 3, and one of them is that blocker role, and it will now just says request removal. So we want to remove the blocker, and maybe we can say Kodi now does need to use the application. So the blocker can be removed. Let's submit it. And right now, I don't have a revocation approval flow on this blocker role, but that is possible. So you could configure it in such a way that if I'm, let's see, want to revoke this, that it goes to a security team to see, it was deleted, it was blocked now, is it still okay to unblock it. But for now, I have no approval flow, so if I go back to Kodi and I'm refreshing this page, instead of 3 roles, which included the blocker, I now expect that it has 2. Let's see, go to Request Center and to My Requests. Remove the blocker, so here it was successful. So I probably need to do one more refresh. And I can see that the roles have now 2 roles in here, and the accounts, we can see that it has been created again. Let's confirm that, go to Airtable, we have our expense accounts, and yeah, we have a new account for Kodi ready to use. And we have unblocked this. So this is everything that we have wanted to achieve today. We have created a way using the transforms to detect whenever an account is an unused account, where we can really support different kinds of date formats from different applications. We do support different amount of days before we consider it an unused account. And based on this, we also managed to create a system that says whenever we detect it, automatically disable it, or even automatically delete it. And for the deletion, we even found a way to suppress Identity Security Cloud to create a new one, which gives us time to take a look at why does this person had that account to begin with, and do we need to make any changes to our roles. So while this presentation is showing the use case of a dormant account, and we have now solved this big puzzle, what we are actually also showing here is that there are a lot of ways to use the IdentityNow or the Identity Security Cloud concepts that we have to our availability. You can use transforms to detect if you have a role. You can use that in a clever way. And so by combining the knowledge that you have of the Identity Security Cloud and adding some creativity, like creating a blocker role, that allows us to basically to push the boundaries of Identity Security Cloud, of what we have seen that is possible. I heard before that there's no out-of-the-box solution for the dormant accounts, but through this way, without using any external scripts, we can see that we have a way to build this in Identity Security Cloud. And with that, that finished my presentation. So I want to thank you for listening, and I wish you a very good day.